and who all knew about it how high up.
The story is called Fast and Furious, and we'll look for more reporting from our guests and CBS News, and certainly more discussion from the congressional committees. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Now to today's live coverage of the House of Representatives. Thanks for being with us.
Submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But no event shall debate continue beyond 11:20 a.m. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'm back on the floor again today to talk about bringing our troops home from Afghanistan. I had the privilege, the honor to be at Walter Reed on Tuesday at Bethesda, and I talked to so many of our young men and women who have lost legs and other parts of their body, and just continue to wonder why in the world the leadership of the House does not join together and call on Mr. Obama to bring our troops home before 2014/2015. Mr. Speaker, I'm holding it up right now from the Wall Street Journal, an article, it's rather lengthy, that says Afghan opium output surges. That is, real encouraging. Our young men and women walking the roads of Afghanistan getting their legs blown off, and yet the drugs in Afghanistan are surging. That's great news for the, I guess, the dealers. Mr. Speaker, in addition to that, on October the 5th, in a poll, it says 1 in 3 vets see Iraq-Afghanistan wars as a waste. And I read, a new opinion survey says 1 in 3 U.S. veterans of the post-9/11 military believes the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are not worth fighting. Most of the vets polled by the Pew Research Center also think that after 10 years of combat, America should be focusing less on foreign affairs and more on its own problems. And I'm pleased to see Ms. Woolsey here on the floor from California, because she has joined many of us in the Republican Party and her Democratic Party in continuing to grow the opposition to staying in Afghanistan until 2014-2015. Well, you might say, well, you keep saying 2014-2015. So I want to make reference to a testimony of former Defense Secretary Gates. This was in February the 16th of this year, 2011, and I want to read. By the end of this calendar year, we expect less than 100,000 troops to be deployed in both of the major post-9/11 combat theaters. Virtually all of these forces being in Afghanistan. That is why we believe that beginning in fiscal year 2015, Mr. Speaker, I want to read that one more time. That is why we believe that beginning in fiscal year 2015, the United States can, with minimal risk, begin reducing Army active duty in strength by 27,000 and the Marine Corps by somewhere between 15 and 20,000. These projections assume that the number of troops in Afghanistan would be significantly reduced by the end of 2014 in accordance with the President's strategy. If our assumptions prove incorrect, there's plenty of time to adjust the size and the schedule of this change. Mr. Speaker, what that means is 2014, the end of 2014 becomes 2015, 2015 becomes 2016. Mr. Speaker, I have a poster here that ran in the Greensboro paper on a Sunday edition, and they had put in their paper the letter from Jim McGovern and myself calling on the President to bring our troops home before 2014, and the title says, Mr. Speaker, "Get Out." And the soldiers are bringing a flag-draped coffin off a plane. I don't know how much longer we have to continue to spend $10 billion a month to prop up a crook named Karzai. I just made reference to a Wall Street Journal that opium surges. I mean, they're just continually, it's a corrupt country, it's never going to change, and we might as well just face the fact that we won. Bin Laden is dead. Al-Qaeda has been dispersed all over the nation, all over the world, and it's time to bring them home. Mr. Speaker, with that, I'm going to be handing out anyone that comes to my office. It's a picture of a Marines carrying a flag-draped coffin, and I say call on the leadership all the way to the White House, to the Senate, and ask them to bring our people home. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will ask God to please bless our men and women in uniform, God, please bless the families of our men and women in uniform. God, in your loving arms, hold the families who've given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I will close by asking God to please bless the House and Senate. I will ask God to give wisdom, strength, and courage to the President. And 3 times I will ask, God, please, God, please, God, please bless America. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Woolsey, for 5 minutes.
One interrogator kept banging my head against the wall. After 2 days, he tied my hands behind my back and started beating me with an electric wire. The interrogation and beating lasted for 3 to 4 hours into the night. For the next 2 days, I was tied up from both wrists to the bars of an iron door. From morning until lunchtime, they put a hood on my head and hung me by my wrists. Mr. Speaker, these are the direct quotes from detainees apprehended in Afghanistan and subjected to torture at the hands of Afghan intelligence officials and police forces. It's all documented in a report issued by the United Nations this week. What they found was systematic abuse that followed a pattern, not random or isolated incidents, a pattern at several different facilities involving at least 300 prisoners. There's more. Kicks to the head, beatings with electric cables, rubber hoses and wooden sticks, electric shocks to the thumbs, threats of sexual abuse, some of them against children. And there are some even more graphic, gruesome details that I know we've read about that I'll spare my colleagues for now. No Americans have been directly implicated in this, but as long as we're continuing a military occupation of Afghanistan, and as long as we've taken on the task of training Afghan security forces, I don't see how we avoid the responsibility for these shameful acts of abuse and ritual humiliation. At the very, very least, Mr. Speaker, we're guilty of shoddy oversight and failure to instruct Afghan officials in humane interrogation techniques. Of course, this kind of brutality is a gross violation of international human rights standards, but it's also well documented that torture doesn't work, that torture, at the very most, for a normal human being will force that human being to confess to anything under such duress, that it's a complete failure as an intelligence gathering strategy. The war in Afghanistan has been going on for 10 years now. It's costing American taxpayers $10 billion a month. How can we justify spending all this money that we need to invest in job creation right here at home, on a policy and a mission that is leading to such barbaric acts? How can we continue to sacrifice blood and treasure on this war, a war that is being waged in such gross violation of our very American values? I've never been more convinced it's time to bring our troops home. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last 2 days, we have been learning some disturbing information about the nation of Iran and its dictator, Ahmadinejad. It seems as though that with the consulting of with Iran and the drug cartels in Mexico, it was the idea that the Iranian government, through one of its operatives, could commit a crime against the United States. We're learning more and more about this, but it's in my opinion that the Iranian government was in the middle of this attempted assault on American soil. The idea that the embassy down the street that belongs to the Saudi Arabians would be attacked, that the Saudi Arabian ambassador would be murdered somewhere in a restaurant in Washington, D.C., with a possible attack on the Israeli ambassador, with a possible attack on the Israeli ambassador and the Saudi Arabian ambassador in Argentina, was being plotted by the Iranian government against us is something that we should be aware of and conscious of and be very concerned about. Thanks to good law enforcement, this terror plot was thwarted. But what if it had occurred? What if the will of this terrorist would be to go to Mexico and meet with what he thought was a Zeta cartel member to smuggle explosives into the United States from Mexico that would be used in an attack in Washington, D.C.? What if that had actually occurred? Certainly, if the Iranian government was involved in it, we would consider that an act of aggression against the United States. And it's interesting to me that the Iranian government was so bold that they thought they could do something like this and get away with it. Did they believe that the United States would not do anything about it? Did they perceive us to be so weak that we would not have shown them consequences for this action against this nation? We don't know. But the truth is we should show the Iranian government that there are consequences for an attempted attack such as this by the Iranian government. There are a couple of things that I think that are important for us to realize. One, we should hold the Iranian government accountable for this attempted attack on American soil, to show them that you must leave us alone, no matter what your political philosophy is. But just as equally disturbing is the fact that this operative that I believe was dispatched by the Iranian government had the wherewithal to go to Mexico, our neighbors, and try to work with the drug cartels down there and working in unison to come into the United States and commit a crime. Now, granted, the person that he was working with was not a Zeta cartel member. It was one of our own law enforcement officers. But the person thought he was working with the drug cartels, and the reason he was working with the drug cartels is because they, too, are at war with the United States. And they have easy access into the United States. On a daily basis, the Zeta drug cartel, which I think is the worst of the worst in Mexico, comes into the United States and brings drugs and people, traffics humans, anything for money. And on a daily basis, they go back to Mexico and they take that money and they take weapons because they have access to our porous borders. If you want to get into the United States, hook up with one of the drug cartels and they'll get you in the U.S. And that's obvious what this Iranian operative was trying to do, was to hook up with them, who will, from the drug cartels, for a little money, will do anything, including commit murder in the United States. So that should tell us that the border is still porous, Mr. Speaker. We hear that it's not, it's safe. It is porous, Mr. Speaker. There are portions that are safe, but the portions that are not safe are where the drug cartels go back and forth. So, two lessons we should be learning is that the Iranian government has it in for the United States. At least some people do in their government. Two, that the border is porous and we need to protect the national security of the United States southern border. So what are we going to do about it? We've heard that, well, we're going to impose some more sanctions, try to isolate Iran. Historically, sanctions have never worked any time countries have tried to use them. It is true that we could actually have some sanctions that would do some good, such as keeping Iran from having refined gasoline going back into the country, and maybe keeping crude oil from going out of Iran. But that doesn't solve the problem long term. The long-term solution in Iran is a regime change. And let me make it clear, that regime change should be by the people of Iran who live in Iran and people who support the freedom fighters in Iran. It's time that the regime of Iran be removed by the good folks who live in Iran, and the United States policy publicly should be, we support those dissidents to get rid of the rogue regime of Ahmadinejad. And that's just the way it is. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to state my strident opposition to H.R. 358, proposed by our colleague, Representative Pitts, which we will be considering later on today. H.R. 358 includes several truly unprecedented restrictions on abortion coverages Coverages, which, by the way, our Supreme Court has determined that are rights of women, and it would limit access to abortion services for all women, regardless of their health status, economic circumstances, age, or any other considerations. This bill would also impose sweeping refusal provisions that not only undermine women's health care and women's rights, but actually endanger women's lives. It's not hyperbole to say that the provisions of the Pitts bill represent an extreme and callous attack on women's health. First, H.R. 358 would effectively end abortion coverage for women in state insurance exchanges, both for those who receive subsidies to buy coverage or for those who use their own private money to buy coverage. This would mean that millions of women, contrary to what we have promised them through the Affordable Care Act, that they would be able to keep coverage they currently have, would actually lose the coverage that they currently have. This Pitts bill represents an unparalleled restriction on the use of private funds and an insurmountable impediment for women who simply want to be able to choose a health plan that will cover all of their potential health needs. Second, H.R. 358 would codify and expand the vast refusal clause currently in law, the Weldon Amendment, granting people with only a tangential connection to abortion services, such as those folks, receptionists, who make appointments or claim adjusters at insurance companies, granting these people the right to refuse services to women who seek abortions. Not only that, but the Pitts bill would make it possible for states to pass a whole new slate of refusal laws that could allow insurers to opt out of covering not just abortion care, but birth control, screening, and counseling for sexually transmitted diseases, mammograms, and much more. But the most shocking expansion of our refusal laws is the provision in H.R. 358 that would exempt hospitals from treating or referring women in case of emergency abortion care, even if women will die without it. Hospitals would no longer be forbidden for abandoning patients on the doorstep of emergency rooms and providing treatment to at least stabilize the medical condition of such patients. This provision heartlessly puts the preferences of hospitals above the lives of women. And finally, Mr. Speaker, H.R. 358 even establishes restrictions on people's ability to get information about their coverage options. The Pitts bill would prevent the federal government, states, or any other entity implementing the Affordable Care Act from requiring access to abortion services. This means, for example, that people may not get impartial or even accurate information from the patient navigators who are designated to help them choose coverage. The advocates at Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin sent me a story that truly encapsulates the emotion, the real-life consequences of what we're talking about today. This is Judy's story, not a woman who wanted an abortion so that her bikini line would not be ruined, but a woman whose mother had died when she was 4 years old. And her husband, she and her husband agonized about their decision, but her health was in jeopardy, and they knew that preserving her health and her life was the best choice for her family. And she painfully, agonizingly decided to terminate her pregnancy to save her life and to preserve the one child that she had's quality of life so that she could rear him. To protect the right to a safe, legal abortion care takes a serious commitment to Wisconsin's health. And it takes courage, Mr. Speaker. Politicians who want to end private health insurance coverage of abortion have neither of these qualities. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Nevada, Ms. Berkeley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on behalf of Nevada's unemployed workers who got a glimpse this week of exactly what is wrong with Washington. Too many politicians in Washington have their priorities upside down. My state is struggling with record unemployment rates. We should be focused every day here in Washington like a laser on job creation. And yet, this week, Washington voted repeatedly to send more jobs overseas. Just yesterday, the House voted to kill legislation that would have stopped China from cheating Nevada workers out of thousands of jobs. These unfair currency manipulation tactics by China have already cost the Silver State nearly 15,000 jobs. And ironically, at the same time that Washington Republicans rejected efforts to stand up to China, 3 job-killing trade agreements sailed through the House and the Senate. These trade agreements could cost our nation another 200,000 jobs. Mr. Speaker, we need jobs here in America, not in foreign countries. Unemployed workers in Nevada and across our nation are counting on us to get our priorities straight. Nevada must stop protecting China and start fighting to create jobs for American workers right here on American soil. I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I request permission to address the House and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, in the current issue of the American Spectator magazine, Robert Mary, the former CEO of the Congressional Quarterly, has a great article that I wish everyone would read. It is an article about the presidency of Andrew Jackson, but it applies lessons of history to modern-day issues and problems better than almost anything I have ever read. Mr. Mary says the Republican Party should not follow the big government conservatism of David Brooks, William Kristol, or presidents like Theodore Roosevelt or George W. Bush, who he says, quote, expanded the size and scope of the federal government and pursued the global goal of remaking other cultures in far-flung regions. Mr. Mary asks, who among past presidents should Republicans turn to for lessons and guidance? The answer, he says, is Andrew Jackson, who would have slapped down the notion of American greatness conservatism, i.e. big government conservatism, with utter contempt because he believed, that is, Jackson believed, the country's greatness emanated from its people, not from its government. Jackson was the great conservative populist of American history, and his story bears study at a time when the country seems receptive to a well-crafted brand of conservative populism. Indeed, Mr. Mary continues, conservative populism is the essence of the Tea Party, opposed to big intrusive government, angry about the corporate bailouts of the late Bush and early Obama administrations, fearful of the consequences of fiscal incontinence, suspicious of governmental favoritism, wary of excessive global ambition. These concerns and fears were Jackson's concerns and fears 180 years ago when he became president, and his greatest legacy is his constant warning that governmental encroachments would lead to precisely the kinds of problems that are today besieging the country. That legacy deserves attention. Mr. Mary also admires Thomas Jefferson. He wrote, Jackson was, of course, a Democrat, but the Democratic Party of that era was almost the polar opposite of today's version. The 19th century party emerged from the politics of Thomas Jefferson, who despised the governing Federalists of the early Republic for their elitist tendencies and pushed for concentrated federal power. Jefferson brought forth new political catchphrases: small government, strict construction of the Constitution, states' rights, reduced taxes, less intrusion into the lives of citizens. His administration, historian Joyce Appleby wrote, would speak for the rational, self-improving, independent man who could be counted on to take care of himself and his family if only intrusive institutions were removed. And then Mr. Mary goes on and says about Jackson, Jackson knew that big government could always be manipulated to benefit the few at the top, especially those who worked or formerly worked for the government and big government contractors. Mary wrote, Jackson's most penetrating political insight was that concentrated governmental power always leads to corruption and abuse. The way to prevent this, he believed, was to maintain a diffusion of power and keep it as close to the people as possible. It wasn't that ordinary folks were less likely to abuse power. Human nature applied to all. But if power were spread out through the polity, it couldn't be directed toward special favors and privileges for those who always managed to get their hands on power when it was available in sufficient increments. The playing field would be level. Of course, the thing Jackson is most remembered for as president is his veto of a federally run national bank. The president wasted no time in vetoing legislation, daring his political opponents to make the most of it. Few documents in the American political literature capture conservative populism with the verve and power of Jackson's veto message. In it, he portrayed the bank as a government-sponsored monopoly that employed the money of taxpayers to enhance the power, privileges, and wealth of a very few Americans and foreigners, chiefly the richest class, who owned stock in the bank and worked for it. If government is to grant such gratuities, he said, let them not be bestowed on the subjects of a foreign government nor upon a designated and favored class of men in our own country. Rather, he added, such favors should be granted in such a way as to let each American in turn enjoy the opportunity to profit by our bounty. Finally, Mary applies the Jackson philosophy to the Dodd-Frank bill and similar legislation, which he says Jackson would have opposed, and says Jackson would expel Wall Street henchmen from the government, particularly if they came from Goldman Sachs. He also wrote Jackson would be aghast that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac still exist. Kill him, he would demand. The whole story of these government-sponsored enterprises would scandalize him, government guarantees that amount to government subsidies that are then used to lobby the government for ever more economic leverage. He has very accurately described the big government, big business duopoly that runs this country today. I urge all of my colleagues and others to read the Robert Mary article about Andrew Jackson in the October issue of the American Spectator magazine. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise as the founder and the co-chair of the Congressional Out of Poverty Caucus to continue to sound the alarm every week that there are millions of Americans in need all across America. They need our help and they need our support. Imagine for a moment if the entire population of 24 states in America were living in poverty. How would our nation respond? We would respond as we do in any emergency, mobilizing to provide these people and families with adequate food, clothing, and shelter. We would come together as a nation and work to solve the crises of poverty. We know that nearly 47 million people lived in poverty in America now, today. That's essentially the entire population of 24 states of this country. The emergency is real, and the crisis is happening each and every day in every city and every town across America. But we are not mobilizing to solve this crisis of poverty. We are not directing federal, state, and local resources to help these men, women, and children. Mr. Speaker, we are really failing those living and facing poverty. If you are facing or living in poverty, something as basic as eating is not a guarantee, and millions go to bed hungry every night. Mr. Speaker, this Sunday, October 16th, is recognized as World Food Day. On Sunday, of course, we all should take a moment and be grateful that many are food secure. But we need to think about the nearly 15% of households and over 16 million children in America who are food insecure. In fact, beyond Sunday, I hope that every member of Congress joins me and other members of the Congressional Out of Poverty Caucus later this month in the 2011 Food Stamp Challenge. Once again, as several of us did a couple of years ago, I challenge my colleagues to live for a week on what a person on food stamp lives on. That is $4.50 a day, and that's $1.50 a meal. So I hope you join us in that effort, my colleagues. Experience is often the best, and I bet that even a few days on living on what a person on food stamps survives on day in and day out might just bring us together to work to address the crisis of poverty. We know what we need to do, really. The pathway to addressing the crisis of poverty, to boosting our stagnating economy, and reducing long-term deficits is the same one. create stable living wage jobs. The most effective anti-poverty program is an effective jobs program. When a family in poverty gains a living wage with good benefits, the family stops relying on government services, and that family begins to pay into the tax base instead of drawing from it. When jobs are created, it boosts demand, which helps to create even more jobs, which is what tax cuts for the wealthy, quite frankly, have always failed to accomplish. So we must come together and pass the President's American Jobs Act and support those initiatives that create stable living wage jobs. But while we work to create new jobs, we cannot forget that there are millions of Americans who are our most vulnerable. There are millions who face hunger, millions who have been looking for a job for more than 99 weeks, and millions of Americans who are losing their homes and struggling to keep their vision of the American dream alive. We must protect the vital safety net programs that support these people in these very hard times from the draconian and short-sighted budget cuts by the so-called super committee. We cannot balance the budget on the backs of our most vulnerable. Poverty is real. It's rural, it's urban. People of all backgrounds, all ethnic backgrounds are poor in our country. And so I hope we can finally, at least on this issue, end the extreme partisanship and really stand united in a bipartisan way and as a nation to create jobs and to address the crisis of poverty ravaging our nation. Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, 40 years from now, a beloved high school history teacher at Tahoe High School named Garrett Fant should be celebrating his retirement, surrounded by generations of his students and his children and grandchildren. They would have all told affectionate stories of how Mr. Fant inspired them or helped them and wished him a happy and well-deserved retirement. Unfortunately, history has willed a different story. Army Specialist Garrett Fant instead returned to South Lake Tahoe last week as a fallen hero at the age of 21. This young man sacrificed all those years, all those memories, all those pleasures, all that life in the service of his country. He loved the Army, and he had a plan for his life. He'd serve his country as a soldier for 20 years, and then he'd come home and serve his community as a high school history teacher. From everything I've learned about Garrett Fant, he would have made a great history teacher. His mother told a reporter that his thought was that high school was the last stop for kids, and he wanted to influence people. He'd have made a great family man. His older brother remembers looking up to Garrett as if Garrett were the older brother. Knowing full well the dangers that surrounded him in Afghanistan, his foremost attention went to reassuring his family that he was safe and secure. His mother said, "He always tried to protect me from the dangers of being over there. He was just someone that if you were his family or his friends or his country, he gave you his all and loved you with everything." Above all, Garrett Fant wanted to be a soldier. His brother tried to get him to enlist with him in the Navy, but Garrett would have none of that. He was all Army, and had known for the time he was a little boy that's what he most wanted to do. On Facebook, he listed his occupation as grunt, telling his friends, "You can't spell infantry without Fant." He was a top marksman in his class of 1,000. I wish I'd known him. I wish my grandchildren might one day have been his high school history students. Instead, Army Specialist Garrett Fant takes his place in history among 9 generations of American heroes who sacrificed all those precious years to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, to stand up to the bullies of the world, to proclaim liberty throughout all the land and unto all the inhabitants thereof. In his farewell address at West Point, General Douglas MacArthur turned his attention to fallen heroes like Army Specialist Garrett Fant and with searing insight he observed, "Their story is known to all of you. It is the story of the American man at arms. My estimate of him was formed on the battlefields many, many years ago and has never changed. I regarded him then as I regard him now, as one of the world's noblest figures, not only as one of the finest military characters, but also as one of the most stainless. His name and fame are the birthright of every American citizen. In his youth and strength, his love and loyalty, he gave all that mortality can give. He needs no eulogy from me or from any other man." And MacArthur goes on to say, "But when I think of his patience under adversity, of his courage under fire, and of his modesty in victory, I am filled with an emotion of admiration I cannot put into words. He belongs to history as furnishing one of the greatest examples of successful patriotism. He belongs to posterity as the instructor of future generations in the principles of liberty and freedom." And so Garrett Fant became a teacher after all. As Shakespeare said, "His story shall the good man teach his son." Succeeding generations of students at South Lake Tahoe High School and also at Valley Oaks High School in American Canyon, which Garrett also attended, will know his story. Every Memorial Day in his hometown, his name will be read with a special pride that his friends and neighbors will share. Strangers will pass by his honored grave, adorned with flags and flowers, and they'll note the few years he had and the sacrifice he made, and be humbled by it, and perhaps inspired by it to become better citizens. No history teacher can do more than that. To his grieving family, on behalf of a grateful nation, I can only say that you do not mourn alone. Your pride in Garrett is shared by your community, by your country, and by many, many history teachers who will tell his story to the latest American generation. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, for 5 minutes.
Let me thank the Speaker for yielding time to me this morning. As I begin my remarks, Mr. Speaker, I just want to make a brief remark about one of the preceding speakers, Congresswoman Barbara Lee from Oakland, California, who has been an advocate for poverty and food insecurity and human rights and all of the global issues that we've talked about over the years. And I want to thank her for her leadership on this very important issue. Congresswoman Lee is the founder of the Out of Poverty Caucus here in the House of Representatives, and I'm honored to serve as one of her co-chairs. But the Congresswoman is absolutely correct. On this Sunday, October 16th, we will celebrate World Food Day, a day to increase awareness, understanding, and information, and inform year-round action to alleviate hunger across the globe in our neighborhoods. The statistical evidence of pervasive and persistent hunger is absolutely staggering. Notwithstanding the human stories of working families in my communities in eastern North Carolina, or families in eastern Africa who cannot get enough food to eat on a daily basis. And so I want to take this opportunity to remind all the members of this body that millions of Americans, millions of people suffer from hunger. And unless we commit to eliminating this scourge, these human beings will suffer persistent poverty, reduced rights, and even death. We must come together. We must come together, Mr. Speaker, to make hunger and nutrition issues, these issues, a priority. It is a priority in my hometown of Wilson, North Carolina. We have a food bank in my community. It's administered by the Wilson OIC, the Wilson Opportunities Industrialization Center. And on at least 4 occasions each year, this center is responsible for passing out food to those suffering from food insecurity. And I have here to my right simply a picture of the last food program in which citizens of our community lined up all night long to receive food in this community. You will see this building. It is a former school. Actually, I went to elementary school there many years ago. This was my first grade classroom, Congresswoman Lee. But this is a former elementary school. It's now the Wilson OIC, and citizens lined up all night long in order to receive food from this program. What a shame. But thank you, OIC, for your effort. 925 million people suffer from chronic hunger worldwide. 1 in 7 people. That is an atrocious statistic. Shockingly, in 2011, there is still severe starvation. The worst drought in 60 years caused a widespread hunger and starvation across the Horn of Africa, and we need to pay attention to the Horn of Africa. Globally, 12 million people are in danger of starving to death, and children are especially vulnerable. In the United States, the richest country in the world, the richest country that we have ever known, in our beloved country, 48 million people live in food insecure households, and these are yet examples of that. That's 1 in 6 people in our country who suffer from food insecurity. The recession that we talk about on this floor every day has exacerbated the plight of many, but in problems with food insecurity began well before 2007. Since the year 2000, the number of people classified by USDA as having very low food insecurity has doubled. My district has been recently classified as the second most insecure district in the country. The federal government certainly needs to find ways to cut costs and reduce spending, but that burden should not fall heaviest on the people with the greatest needs. We need to continue our investments in agriculture research to empower scientists to develop more efficient and sustainable methods of production. We should maintain and improve our commitments to foreign aid programs through USAID, improving them to provide greater access to needed resources. Finally, Mr. Speaker, my predecessor in this office, former Congresswoman Eva Clayton, was a strong, clear voice on behalf of the hungry of the country and those abroad. During her 10 years in Congress, she was staunchly committed to improving access and quality of food stamps, WIC, and other programs. Following her retirement, she was appointed Assistant Director of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. In this astounding legacy, we will be introducing legislation, probably tomorrow, to honor the work of Eva Clayton, the Eva Clayton Fellows Program Act of 2011. This is a wonderful program. I urge my colleagues to pay attention to the introduction of this bill. It will be significant. Thank you. I've run out of time. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schilling, for 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in the spirit of competition, in support of American workers, and as an advocate for a government that seeks to provide economic certainty for the businesses that create jobs in this country. Last night, Mr. Speaker, the House voted on bipartisan trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea. These agreements represent an opportunity to compete, grow jobs, and to promote American exports. Here's what we know, Mr. Speaker. 95% of the world's customers live outside this great country. Here's another thing, Mr. Speaker. If America gives itself the opportunity to compete with other countries, like these 3 agreements will, American manufacturing and farmers will deliver, and we will all win. Job creation is red, white, and blue. It's definitely a red, white, and blue issue. And that is why you saw both Democrats and Republicans coming together yesterday to provide opportunity for American exports to compete. In the 17th District of Illinois, in which I represent, I recently visited a company that makes the big mining trucks. 80% of those trucks ship outside of the United States of America. This company employs 3,000 workers, which is equal to supplying jobs to 2,400 of those. These jobs are dependent upon exports. The same company also manufactures bulldozers. 8 out of 10 of those are sold to buyers from overseas. Yet again, this is an example of jobs being created because of the demand for American products by customers in the global economy. These trade agreements will reduce tariffs on goods and remove barriers that are currently in place. By leveling the playing field for our manufacturers and farmers, we can further promote these cornerstones of the American economy. We need to enact these policies that strengthen our manufacturing base, which is why I am co-sponsoring legislation offered by my colleague and friend, Dan Lipinski, which will pave the way for our national manufacturing strategy. 3 million manufacturing jobs and almost 4 million ag jobs are dependent upon U.S. exports. The independent U.S. International Trade Commission estimates that these agreements will increase American-made exports by $13 billion and inject $10 billion to our GDP. President Obama estimates that these jobs could create 250,000 jobs. According to the Congressional Research Service, the last time the United States signed a trade agreement was back in 2006 with Peru. These 3 trade agreements the House passed last night could have been sent to Congress back in 2009. Every day we delay is a day we deny American workers job opportunities to compete. These trade agreements aren't about rhetoric, they are about results. We cannot afford to sit on the sidelines anymore while other countries enter into trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and South Korea, causing us to lose more of the market share. Again, I support these free trade agreements. If, as a country, we are allowed to compete, I know we will deliver. With that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida, Mrs. Wasserman Schultz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the achievements of Marcia Jo Zarevitz, founding executive director and chief curator of the Jewish Museum of Florida. Marcia has been a leader in the organized Florida Jewish community for more than 40 years. Originally from West Virginia, she has been a leader in Jewish organizations since her work with Hillel during her college years. Since the 1970s, Marcia has held various leadership roles within organizations such as Israel Bonds, AIPAC, ORT, and Hadassah. Throughout her lifetime, Marcia has broken the glass ceiling as the first woman in many positions, including as president of the Greater Orlando Jewish Federation, one of the first women nationally to hold this office. She was also the first woman to chair the Florida Association of Jewish Federations Conference in 1979. In 1993, Marcia guided the restoration of an abandoned 1936 Art Deco building on Miami Beach that served as an Orthodox synagogue for 50 years and opened the Jewish Museum of Florida in 1995. She led the effort to get the museum accredited and has presented more than 50 exhibits in 15 years. The museum, which is on the National Register of Historic Places, collects, preserves, and interprets the Jewish experience in Florida since at least 1763, when Jews were first allowed to live in the state. In 2003, she initiated state legislation for a Florida Jewish History Month, which is now recognized each January. And in 2005, Marcia and members of Miami's Jewish community approached me with the idea to designate a month to honor the contributions American Jews have made to our nation. As a result, I was the proud sponsor of the Jewish American Heritage Month resolution, which the House and Senate unanimously passed in 2006 and has been proclaimed by President Bush and President Obama annually since then. Marcia Zarevitz should take great pride in knowing that Jewish American Heritage Month, which is now celebrated across our nation each May, began with her work at the Jewish Museum of Florida. I am honored to recognize Marcia Jo Zarevitz for the positive impact that she has made not just on Florida's Jewish community, but on communities across our nation. I wish her well on her retirement and thank her for enriching the lives of countless others in the Jewish community and around the country. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I come to the floor a second time, as I promised a couple weeks ago, to talk about high-level nuclear waste and the Yucca Mountain Repository. 2 weeks ago, I highlighted Hanford, Washington, a DOE site that has 53 million gallons of nuclear waste. 53 million gallons of nuclear waste that's stored 10 feet underground in tanks that are leaking. The waste is 250 feet above the water table, and the waste is 1 mile from the Columbia River. Versus federal law, which said in 1982 that Yucca Mountain should be our national repository. Now let's look at Yucca Mountain. Right now there's no nuclear waste on site. The waste would be stored 1,000 feet underground. The waste is 1,000 feet above the water table, and the waste would be 100 miles from the Colorado River. 100 miles versus 1 mile, high-level nuclear waste, especially with Hanford, where you have nuclear waste that actually is leaking outside the tanks. So then my response was, well, what are the senators in these two states doing, and what's their position? Because the reason why we're not moving to Yucca Mountain is because of one U.S. Senator, the Majority Leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, who has blocked the movement of Yucca Mountain. Obviously, these senators have an interest because of the Columbia River, and I was trying to encourage them through the use of the bully pulpit that this was a time to move to get this resolution resolved, especially after Fukushima, Daiichi. Everybody's following the tragedy in Japan, and part of that was high-level nuclear waste in storage ponds right on site. Since then, I've been able to get a few quotes from these senators or research them. Senator Cantwell said, the National Academy of Sciences has concluded that the best approach is to bury nuclear waste deep underground. Since that conclusion, Yucca Mountain in Nevada has been chosen as the national repository. Senator Murray said this, I believe that it is irresponsible for the Department of Energy to discontinue the Yucca program altogether, its funding, licensing, and design. Senator Wyden has said, I don't see that Yucca Mountain will reopen. I think that there will be an effort to look at new technology, on-site storage, and a whole host of approaches, but I don't think that's going to happen. So Senator Wyden is accepting this in Hanford, a mile from the Columbia River. Senator Merkley has been quiet as far as we could find from the Google search pairing his name and any Yucca Mountain comments. Now, lest people think I'm picking on the Northwest, let me go to my home state of Illinois. So one facility, Zion Nuclear Power Plant. It's a decommissioned plant, but there's still 65 casks containing 1,135 metric tons of nuclear waste versus Yucca Mountain, which has 0. The waste at Zion is stored above the ground. The waste at Yucca Mountain would be 1,000 feet below the surface. The waste at Zion is 5 feet above the water table. The waste at Yucca Mountain would be 1,000 feet. The waste at Yucca Mountain is 100 miles from the Colorado River. The waste from Zion is 1,300 feet from Lake Michigan. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that Yucca Mountain is safer than storing high-level nuclear waste next to Lake Michigan. So what have our senators said? Well, let's start with Senator Durbin. He's quoted as saying, there are a lot of options out there, but I have supported Yucca in the past, and I'm not walking away from that. I just think we need to consider other options as well. I want him to obviously continue to consider Yucca Mountain. Senator Kirk has said, I think in the end Congress needs to fight and win the battle to build the Yucca Mountain facility so that we can store nuclear waste 1,000 feet below the surface. I agree. Senator Cole is quoted as saying, this site on the Nevada nuclear test site, that's what people don't know, is that Yucca Mountain is also the Nevada nuclear test site. That's where we tested the nuclear bombs during the nuclear arms race and the nuclear age.
So Senator Cole is correct in saying this site on the Nevada nuclear test site is certainly safer than leaving the waste at 132 sites nationwide, sites scattered around the country that were never designed to be permanent solution. Senator Johnson is silent. I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Donnelly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to applaud the bipartisan majority in the Senate for passing legislation to take on currency manipulators and to urge our House of Representatives and our House Republican leadership to do the same, to allow a stand-up, up or down vote on currency manipulation legislation here in the House of Representatives. In a period of congressional gridlock, we must seize every bipartisan opportunity available to us not only to create jobs, but also to protect the good-paying jobs we already have. As the Senate demonstrated this week by passing the Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Reform Act, the time is now to take advantage of bipartisan cooperation. 16 Republican senators joined 47 Democratic senators in voting for this legislation to counter an unfair trade practice that is hampering our economic recovery. In February, Congressman Sander Levin, Tim Ryan, and Tim Murphy introduced the Currency Reform for Fair Trade Act. H.R. 639 has garnered 225 bipartisan co-sponsors, more than enough to secure House passage. This would allow the Department of Commerce to counter imports made cheaper by currency manipulation with a corresponding tariff. A nearly identical bill passed the House of Representatives last year by a strong, overwhelming bipartisan vote of 348 to 79, both Republicans and Democrats. When countries are allowed to keep the value of their currencies artificially low, and in turn the prices of their exports into the United States, American companies and American workers face an unfair disadvantage. Forced to compete on an unlevel playing field where competitors are able to maintain a permanent 30 to 40% off sale on their products, American jobs are lost and our trade deficit grows with countries like China. The Economic Policy Institute recently released a study, and it showed that in the last 10 years, the U.S. lost 2.8 million jobs, including nearly 62,000 jobs in my home state of Indiana, as a result directly of the expanding trade deficit with China. Many experts agree countries like China that manipulate their currencies are damaging the U.S. economy. Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke recently expressed concern that the Chinese currency policy is blocking what might be a more normal recovery process in the global economy. And he stated it is to some extent hurting the United States recovery. Chairman Bernanke is tasked directly with the responsibility of serving and protecting America's economic interests. He recognizes the impact that Chinese currency manipulation is having on our economy. It is long past time for this House of Representatives to do the same. After the Senate expressed interest in considering S-1619, China immediately went on the offensive, issuing threats and saying such legislation could spark a trade war. Though China's comments are disappointing, they are not unexpected, and Congress should not shy away from doing what is in America's best interest. That is our job. China's unfair currency policies have cost millions of Americans their jobs, and I believe inaction on this issue is dangerous to our economic recovery and continues to put at risk hundreds of thousands of additional American jobs. When I travel around my district, I hear from small businesses and manufacturers on this issue, and they never ask for Congress to guarantee their success. All they want is a fair fight, for the rules to be the same. And I believe given a level playing field, American businesses will win every single time. Once again, to our House leadership, please allow bipartisan legislation addressing currency manipulation to come before the full House of Representatives for a standalone up or down vote. Who are you going to stand with? The Chinese government or American businesses and American workers? The American people want a vote now and deserve a vote now. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Crawley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are now more than 275 days into this 112th Congress, and the GOP leadership has put forward zero American jobs bills and outright rejected consideration of President Obama's jobs proposal. So if jobs aren't at the heart of the Republican Tea Party's agenda, what is? Passage of anti-labor legislation to weaken the rights of middle-class workers and encourage the shipping of jobs overseas. Check. Passage of anti-middle-class legislation to raise taxes on hard-working families. Check. Passage of anti-environment legislation to roll back clean air standards. Check. Passage of anti-education legislation to slash Pell Grants for middle-income students to afford college. Check. And later today, passage of its seventh anti-women's health measures. Today's bill will put the government in the middle of Americans' health choices and allow hospitals to refuse life-saving treatment to women. Mr. Speaker, every day it feels more and more like the movie Groundhog Day in here. I wake up hoping there will be something different, but it's just the same scene played over and over and over. The Republican Tea Party agenda stuck on repeat might satisfy the extreme right wing, but it neither satisfies nor helps hard-working Americans. It is time for the GOP leadership to learn a lesson from Groundhog Day. The only way out of it is to do better. The American people don't want token legislation, extreme partisanship, or sideshow politics. They want real solutions, real jobs, and a real vision. They want a vision for America. A vision for America. And like the movie, they are desperate for a new day. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.